Good morning if you are in France, good afternoon if you are in Taiwan, and hello if you are in the rest of the world. I am Barthélémy Courmont, a Senior Research Fellow with IRIS and also Head of Development. I will be the host of this webinar today, which will be dealing with the very important issue of gender equality, and the title is A Comparison Between France and Taiwan. So just in order to introduce a little bit the topic and our presenters, gender equality is defined as the state of equal ease of access to resources and opportunities regardless of gender. According to the United Nations definition, it is, I quote, a fundamental human right as well as a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. In France, Emmanuel Macron has defined gender equality the, I quote again, great national cause of his second term. At the Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs, the issue of gender equality is being addressed at two levels. Internally, in order to improve occupational equality, but also externally under France's foreign policy. On the other side, Taiwan appears to be a model at the Asian level of developments as regards gender equality, notably under the leadership of the current president, Tsai Ing-wen, who became in 2016 the first elected woman president of Taiwan. Taiwan currently ranks second globally behind Belgium in the 2023 OECD Social Institutions and Gender Index. The share of seats in parliament in Taiwan held by women is about 40%, which is roughly equal to Denmark and higher, for instance, than the United States, with less than 30%. Tsai Ing-wen said that she has greater expectations, however, and she notably hopes society will stop treating women's successes as rare occurrences, but rather something that happens naturally. Back in 2021, she said she hopes the term strong woman will one day become as unpopular as strong men in the media and the different newspapers. So we can see that both countries, France and Taiwan, has undertaken important reforms to reinforce gender equality. However, despite these advances in women's political participation, it is unclear to what extent the increase in female representation has translated into improvements in women's social and economic status in both France and Taiwan. We will be discussing today all these issues, both the current state in France and Taiwan, the implications of both countries, but also the challenges ahead. And we are very glad to welcome three distinguished speakers. We will proceed according to the format of a presentation of about 15 minutes for each of our panelists, followed by a series of Q&R. I will be personally in charge of the questions. So for all our participants, I invite you to ask your questions in the little icon on your screen, and I will be collecting the questions during the presentation and ask our panelists to provide some answers. The order will be first Mrs. Chen Yi-Juang. Sorry, I'm wrong. We changed the order. Sorry, our first panelist will be Madame Delphine O. After being a member of the Parliament for La République En Marche, Delphine is currently Ambassador at Large and Secretary General for the Generation Equality Forum, the Beijing Plus 25. She also led the organization of the largest international summit for women's rights since 1995, convened by UN Women and co-chaired by France and Mexico. And Delphine, I know you have also published last month a book with Talandier entitled La diplomatie féministe est un sport de combat. Your presentation will be followed by Mrs. Chen Yi-Juang. You are, Dr. Chen, a Deputy Minister of National Science and Technology Council in Taiwan. And you're also Distinguished Research Fellow of the Institute of Biomedical Sciences. And you will explain to us not only the current situation, but also the implications of Taiwan as regards gender equality. Our last presentation will be provided by someone very familiar with all those who are interested with IRIS works, Marie-Cécile Naves, who is a senior research fellow and director of the Gender and Geopolitics Observatory at IRIS. And among the many publications that Marie-Cécile has given us in the past few years, I would like to mention her last two books published in 2023, Géopolitique des féminismes with Erol, and La démocratie féministe with Kalman Levy. Thank you very much for the three of you for joining us today. I will end right here my short presentation and give the floor to Delphine O. Thank you, Delphine, for joining us. And you have about 15 minutes presentation.
Thank you very much, Barthélémy, and greetings, Deputy Minister and Mrs. Naves, and to all of our online followers for this very interesting panel and comparison conference between France and Taiwan. I will focus my presentation on the role and activities of France in the international stage, but I should be remiss if I couldn't say a few words about the situation in France. First, one should state, and it's quite an obvious fact, but it should be reminded that no country has achieved gender equality in the world. And indeed, you were mentioning that, France and Taiwan are quite well ranking when we're looking at international ranking, when it comes to parity in politics, when it comes to representation of women in the economic sphere, when it comes to rates of gender-based violence, when it comes to social and economic status of women. However, neither France nor Taiwan, nor Sweden nor Canada has actually achieved full gender equality. Actually, the World Economic Forum of Davos estimates it will take us more than 200 years to achieve gender equality. So that's not my generation, that's not the generation after me, not the generation even after that. And in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, so there is one SDG number 5, that is specifically dedicated to gender equality. And the estimation of the UN is that it is one of the SDGs that is actually the furthest remote from being achieved compared to other SDGs, and where we have been doing the fewest progress compared to other SDGs. So the situation is definitely not brilliant. And even though we can take pride and satisfaction in some progress, we should be very vigilant with the little progress that overall we have made. I just wanted to mention some of the recent laws that were passed in France, because as you said, this president, who is doing his second mandate, has declared gender equality and women's rights to be the great national cause, but also the great international cause. And maybe some of the best practices that we've had in this administration and previous administration that could be examples for other countries, as we're also looking at other countries to be inspired. One of the major and interesting regulations that were put in place is the Index Pénicaud, which was put in place in the previous administration, is a very simple way of ranking and grading all companies, all French companies, may they be very small, like 10 employees, up to more than 1,000 employees. They are ranked above a grade of 100 based on 5 criteria, which are public and transparent. And those criteria include, for instance, the number of women in the top 10 salaries in the company, the rate of promotion for women, also the gender pay gap, obviously, and also one measure what I think is very important, and I'm very interesting to hear about it, what's happening in Taiwan, is the promotion of women who are coming back from maternity leave, because we know that one of the reasons of the sustaining gender pay gap and of inequalities in the work environment is because of the maternity leave. So this is very interesting because this ranking system has actually triggered a number of big French companies to implement a lot of measures to improve the gender equality and parity. I also wanted to mention some of the most famous quota laws, and I know quotas are not very famous or not very popular everywhere in the world, but France has adopted more than 10 years ago 2 laws that impose quotas for women in high decision-making positions in the public and in the private sector. And thanks to that, we have now 40% of women in direction positions in the administration, and also in company boards. And we have also a new law that also mandates a 30% quota in executive committee of companies. We also are very happy to have almost 40% of women in parliament. So we reached that threshold in the previous legislature, where I think now at about 37%. And so lagging a little bit behind Taiwan, as I understand, but still quite a good number. Now, in terms of our action internationally, so as you said, I'm the ambassador for gender equality. It's interesting to note that my position was created quite recently, and it's very few countries in the world that have created a position within their Ministry of Foreign Affairs at the ambassadorial level to direct and pilot and coordinate their foreign policy when it comes to gender equality. And the creation of this position was actually coinciding with the announcement of France adopting a feminist foreign policy. And this is what I would like to explain now. So in 2019, France was the 4th country in the world after Sweden, Canada, and Mexico to announce a feminist foreign policy. And even those who are experts in the foreign policy world, even most of the researchers don't actually know what a feminist foreign policy is. So it's a very interesting concept to explore and to try to explain. First, there is no overall or universal definition of feminist foreign policy. There's now some research being done from different institutes and think tanks and universities. There are more and more students who are coming to me saying they're doing their thesis on feminist foreign policy, but it's a very recent concept. It was actually invented by Sweden in 2014. So imagine it's less than 10 years ago now. It's a very recent concept. And it hasn't been really theorized by anybody. Each country is very kind of free to adopt and define and frame its own feminist foreign policy. The way that I like to define ours, and I like to give it, to explain to the larger public what a feminist foreign policy is actually quite very simple. Its first is to prioritize gender equality and women's rights as one of our priorities of a foreign policy. This may seem quite obvious, but it's actually not very obvious. For foreign policy, for diplomacy, for the work of international relations, for a long time, gender equality and women's rights were a secondary thought, if any thought, by the way, at all. And for a long time, also, it was restricted to the realm of development and cooperation. When I mean development and cooperation, I mean access of women and girls to health, access to education, fight against gender-based violence. All of this is very important, and it's still work to be done. But when we talk about feminist foreign policy, we elevate this concept, and we elevate the issue of women's rights and gender equality to a security priority, to a climate priority, to a cultural priority, to a trade priority, to an economic priority, and so on and so on and so on. So women's rights have to be embedded in all the components of a foreign policy. Whatever the region, whatever the country, whatever the topic, we have to adopt a gender lens in all of these components of a foreign policy. And this is very new and refreshing because, again, it goes against compartmentalizing women's rights in putting it in a box so that only experts work on this and the other diplomats don't have to work on it. Now, how does it translate into facts and successes or failures? It varies, of course, from one country to another. The way that France has conducted its feminist foreign policy is first to use its unique position, of course, as one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, as one of the members of the G7, of the G20, of the OECD, of most, if not all, of the multilateral institutions use its unique foremost position to advance gender equality and just to actually table the issue when it's not being tabled. And so, for instance, when we held the presidency of the G7 in 2019, the same year we announced the feminist foreign policy, we made sure that gender equality was a priority of the G7, which it definitely did used not to be for a very long time. And not every country who holds the chairmanship of the G7 actually prioritizes gender equality. We're following in the footsteps of Canada, but the year after, when actually the U.S. administration under President Trump was holding the presidency of the G7, clearly it did not make gender equality a priority at that time. And fortunately, there was the UK and Germany and Japan and so on. So we launched a number of measures at that time, focusing on promoting female entrepreneurship in Africa by granting access to credit to female entrepreneurs. We created the Biarritz Partnership, which is a collection of the best, most advanced, most sophisticated laws in the world, from which other countries can get inspiration from and kind of replicate in their own country. We've also launched a number of initiatives since we announced the feminist foreign policy that are meant to both answer the international news and the international situation, but also provide a specific attention to women's rights defenders. We know that today women's rights defenders all over the world are under attack in a general context of the multiplication of crises, of conflicts, of wars, but also in the general context of the rise of anti-rights movements, the rise of what we call the backlash, which is this conservative reactionary movements that are openly campaigning to actually revert women's rights, which are openly campaigning against abortion rights, against sexual and reproductive rights, against even economic rights of women. We've seen that in the US presidency of Trump, of course. We've seen that also under Bolsonaro in Brazil. Unfortunately, even in Europe, we've seen that in the previous government in Poland, which restricted the right to abortion in really terrible circumstances. We've seen that in Hungary. We're seeing that in Italy, next door neighbor to France. And one day it could even happen to France. And we're seeing that also in many countries in Africa and Asia happening. So in that context, we launched a number of initiatives to support and protect women's rights defenders, which we think are really at the forefront of doing this work of gender equality on the ground, where governments sometimes do not actually have access. So we launched the Marianne Initiative for Human Rights Defenders. So that's an initiative that selects every year about 15 human rights defenders. At least half of them are women. Actually, the first promotion, all of them are women, coming from Belarus, Russia, Nicaragua, Afghanistan, Syria, Cameroon, and other countries, which bring them to France, provides them with a grant and a scholarship, provide them with access to institutions, with also housing, of course, and sometimes provide them with asylum also, in order for them to showcase their work and to make connections, and also to get some respite from the countries where they're coming from, where they're being harassed and oppressed. We also, for instance, contributed to the creation of the Global Survivors Fund. So the Global Survivors Fund is an initiative launched by the two Nobel Peace Prize of 2019, Dr. Denis Mukwege from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Nadia Mourad, who is a Yazidi human rights defenders. And so they launched this global fund, which aim is to provide reparations for victims of sexual violence and conflict. As we see in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Yemen, in Libya, in Ukraine, unfortunately, today in the context of the conflict between Israel and Palestine, women are always the first victims of sexual violence and conflict, and they're not getting the reparations they are owed. And so we contributed to the creation of this Global Survivors Fund. I could go on and on with different initiatives. I just wanted to mention one last one, which is the one that I co-led in 2021, so 2 years ago, which is the Generation Equality Forum. So in the context of backlash, it had been 25 years since the Beijing conference, which is the most historically significant, the most important UN conference on women's rights that took place in 1995. Unfortunately, that was the last one. So I like to say, imagine if the last COP took place 25 years ago, 1995. What would the world say? Well, that's what's happening with women's rights. It was 25 years since the international community actually came together to set an agenda and to make commitments for gender equality. 1995, can you imagine? And so in 2020, UN Women decided to hold another conference, despite the attacks, despite the resistance, despite the backlash. And this was a new type of conference. It was co-hosted, as you said, by France and Mexico, one global North, one global South country. It took place so both in Mexico and both in Paris. And what we tried to do is kind of a change the game in doing things differently. So there was no resolution. There was no final declaration. There was no communique from the leaders. There's only the creation of 6 action coalitions. And by coalitions, we meant coalitions of countries, of course, of international organizations, but also civil society organizations and the private sector. So that was quite innovative in bringing together different kind of stakeholders that usually do not work together, even though actually many of them are working towards advancing gender equality. And so we worked on ending gender-based violence, on improving women's economic empowerment, on improving the role of women in the fight against climate change, improving the place of women in technology and innovation, in supporting feminist organizations, and in supporting also sexual and reproductive rights. And we were glad to announce $40 billion of support coming mostly from countries for international organization and from private sector to support gender equality over the next 5 years. So this was already 2 years ago, but this was a major achievement because we managed to bring on around the table around 78 countries. And so you may say, well, only 78 countries, it's not even half of the UN. Well, it was actually an achievement because we know the context of backlash. And there's so many countries today, member states, who are actually actively resisting, even just continuing with agreed language that was agreed 10, 15, 20, 25, sometimes 30 years ago, agreed language on gender equality and promoting women's rights. They're actively resisting and blocking this. So we're quite happy with this, but this is ongoing work in progress. I think I'm going to end here on our feminist foreign policy. There's a lot more to say. Just maybe we have 12 countries in the world that have adopted a feminist foreign policy. Most of them are in Europe, North America, but we're also happy that 4 of them, so 1/3, are in Latin America: Mexico, Chile, Colombia, Argentina. A very interesting development, considering that Latin America has the highest rates of femicides in the world, but also is actually very advanced in many other parts of gender equality. And we're hoping that other countries, especially in Africa, in the Middle East, and in Asia, may be also adopting and announcing a feminist foreign policy, not because of the label, but because this also gives even internal legitimacy to advance a very progressive and forward-looking agenda when it comes to gender equality on the international stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Delphine, for this very interesting presentation. I believe we will have lots of questions, and I consider that indeed you have a lot of other things to tell us. Unfortunately, the time is limited, but I'm pretty sure that you will be responding to some questions. So I invite all the participants to keep asking questions. I can see that we have some participants from Niger, so we welcome participants from all around the world, obviously, and it's very good news. So please use the Q&R little icon so you can ask your questions, and I will be collecting them. I will now give the floor to Dr. Chen. Dr. Chen, thank you very much also for joining us from Taiwan. And I can see that you have the Taiwan little banner behind you. It's very good. It's good to be proud of being a Taiwanese. So I assume that as regards what has been explained by Delphine, you have a lot of specific issues to discuss, not only the current situation in Taiwan, but also the position of Taiwan globally, especially considering the fact that unfortunately Taiwan is not represented in the UN institution. So I will leave you the floor for about 15 minutes.
Okay. Good morning. Good evening. Could I share my slide? I would like to share a short slide. Can you see it?
I think it's coming. Yes, it is.
Okay, wonderful. Let me put it in a display. Okay, so it's truly an honor to be here. We'd love to have this opportunity to share with you what happens in Taiwan, and hopefully that we could share information and experiences to make things better. I am from National Science and Technology Council. It's part of the government domain. We support 9,000 projects every year in 4 different disciplines, basically science and technology, and in 4 disciplines, including life science, also nature science, engineering, and humanity. So because of our role, what I would like to tell you today is basically a general situations in Taiwan, and also how we look at the data and try to improve our gender equality and what happens in the past 5 years to 10 years. So of course that it goes without saying that gender equality is one of the most important things in the world, for particularly for the world right now. I think every country, including France and Taiwan, we probably suffer from not many students are interested in going into STEM and other parts. So we need to encourage our peoples, young and old. So what we do is, what have been doing is since 2005, that's quite a few years ago, we noticed that this is really important, and would like to actively promote gender as a mainstream policy of our government. So in 2012, let me put it into a laser pen. Okay, in almost like 10 years ago, we actually put it into the so-called executive yuan. This is very similar to French government. It's a major government unit. We put it as a main policy, and we look into our different government unit and try to improve the gender equality. So we have a committee in all units, including my institute, NSTC. Now, this has been briefly mentioned that in several index, for example, G2 Gender Equality Index and the Social Institution Gender Index, we've been doing pretty well. And for example, that in 2019, we already have legalizations of same-sex marriage. And also, this also have been mentioned that 2 years later, we have over 40% of legislators are females. I would just give you 2 pieces of data just to have a flavor. That, for example, this is since 2011 that we start to look at our gender pay gap, and you'll see Taiwan is here. That almost like 12 years ago, that the gap between men and females is like 17%, and we try to improve it. And now in 2018, a few years back, is reduced a bit. And this, we're not totally satisfied with it, but it actually make the pay gap a little bit smaller. Another thing, this is also a very interesting piece of data. If you look at this, this is a percentage of women that, for example, in elected representative, supervisor, and managerial position, that initially, this is if we look at the red bar is let me move this a little bit. This is 2022. We have about 30% of the women in the leadership decision-making portion. This is pretty much close to some of the European country up here. Still, we are like 10% below than French. But I think this is demonstrating that in the past that we have tried to make all the policy, starting from education, have different strategy and trying to improve the percentage of women in the decision-making group. Now, we also have done things, for example, to protect people under sexual harassment. So this is a very recent thing that we put it into a legal amendments, trying to strengthen, trying to make the punishment more severe. But more importantly, is to complete victim friendly rights protection to protect our victim, and also educate people so that our society would be more trustworthy, and we could have a professional system that would prevent sexual harassment. So these are the thing we've been doing nationwide and trying to actually improve the awareness. Now I have a few slides I want to share with you that what are the strategy that we use in one particular community, scientific community. Now, if we look at the data here, it's actually quite interesting. The red indicating females and the blue signal down there, you can see it because they overlap. These are the college students in scientific field. Now, when they go into, the two lines start to separate a little bit when we look into master students. Now, when into PhD students, the gap between larger. How about when they go into faculty position? That doesn't change much. But here that we have a funded R01, this is a grant support. As I mentioned earlier, NSTC is an agency that support funding. When we look at this, the gap is even wider. That's pretty scary when we look at that. But look at the another data. This is a Research Outstanding Award. This is an award in Taiwan that if you get it, you probably get promoted and everything. So it's a very important award. The gap even become bigger. Now, another thing, another data that we're looking into is so-called Summit program. This is a program that we encourage our scientists to lead a group of scientists working on the focus projects, and it will be very much funded, supported by NSTC. Now, if we look at the data here, the gap is really surprising to us. We had this analysis about 2 years ago. Now, we found that most of the program was led by male. So at that time that we started to look into our system and decided and start to think what would be the strategy we could use to improve it. So there are several strategies we're using. For example, we start to have gender innovation projects. We encourage people to look into what happens. This is part of the reason that we would like to actually encourage more females into this area. Now, so the goal is to see whether we could, by analyzing the current data and to improve the gender equality. So what we have been doing is to support a project that in all 4 disciplines that I just told you, humanity, nature science, engineering, life science, provide project to analyze the gender situations in Taiwan. And every year we support about 30 to 40 projects. And this is one example that we have a grant call from 2022 to 2025. It would focus on particularly, for example, what would be the gender-friendly environment for science and technology? What would be the gender, how can we improve if we're looking at the gender difference and to improve the health outcome, and also how to enhancing women's economy and social impact. So these are the things we suggest our scientists to analyze and provide the data to explain the situation we have seen. Now, the most popular research topic usually coming from how to enhance health outcome. And when we have the result, we provide our result to the relevant authority. So here's a few possibilities. For example, we in the past, that scholar had looked into fertility statistics, but they only mostly look at women, but not men. But then it actually has a biased view. So we start to see whether we could correct it. And I shouldn't say correct it, but to enrich our analysis. And then this will be provided to our Minister of Health and Welfare, providing for birth policy. Now, another possibility is to look into, this is another project, to look at over-medication and see whether we could protect women from over-protection. The third is interesting. We look at gender difference in physical disability and cognitive impairments among elderly. This is interesting because we found most females elderly, they are more complying to the suggestion, doing exercise, but not male, at least in Taiwan society. So then we could have a different program designed to help these elderly to improve their physical situation. So these are the things we have been doing. Also, another thing, I remember that earlier on that Delphine had mentioned, it is important to have to be able to bring back those females, either scientists, workers, or back to the environments when they leave for maternity. So we have also so-called warm-up project. This would provide for those women that they left, probably they leave the scientific research environment, technology environment, because they need to have their children having birth and also bring them up in. So what we have been doing is that we provide a very specific grant call for this proposal. It is a very different one because considering that if you leave science for 3 years, your publication would probably be severely damaged. You probably don't have that much record in the 3 years. So what we've been doing is to provide so-called warm-up projects. We suggest that people come in and we would to submit the proposal. And what we can do is to provide the funding. Maybe the funding size is not big, but that provide a possibility for our scientists or researcher. They could start to work on things to develop their record. So in the past few years, we have 756 grants that submitted, and we cultivated a few hundreds scientists. And we actually look into the data, for example, that take the early on, the 2018 years. For those PI that have got this grant, they start to have really better improving passing rate for their grant application. So, and that is much higher than those that didn't really join this program. So we think this would help our female scientists to come back to the research area. But then another thing very important for people that need to raise a family is that they really need to raise a family. They need to take care of their young kid. So we have trying very hard to develop a parents-friendly academic environment. So what have we done? That since 2 years ago, we invite PI to submit their request. Now, if their proposal got funded, we provide one additional personal assistance to their projects. Also, we provide flexible application time if they get pregnant. But then when we start to do that, interestingly, our male scientists also suggest this also should be provided to male PIs. So we have single parents or people taking parental leave since last year. So for this project, that up to now, we have supported more than 300 female scientists and 5 male scientists for this. Now, we also provide childcare service for holding international symposium in Taiwan. So mother could actually go on the symposium without worry. They could just leave their kids over there. So that's being promoted in Taiwan. This is also quite interesting. We believe that education from really early on is important. This activity, if you could tell, this is our president, our President Tsai over here. This is back in 2021. We have a very special activity called Girls in Cyber Security. We look for female high school students. Our goal is to cultivate their interest, make them feel confident that girls and women can be very successful in science and technology field. In the past few years, we focus on ICT technology. So we invite these high school students come over, and they would have instructor to teach them the basic knowledge, and also teach them how to survive and how to be successful in the career path. So this is really important. We have our president here to encourage our young high school student, and next year this is our vice president. So we actually bring up our most important figure to encourage our young people. Now this is also interesting. We're trying to develop a friendly environment. So this is one society in Taiwan that we call Women in Science and Technology. This is a conference they just had, and they invite many scientists, many different people from science, from technology, from industry, to share their experiences and how to be successful. So this is part of the effort we have done to encourage our women to become leader in the field. So basically, what we've been doing is to promoting women's participations in STEM field. We also encourage them coming back when they have their children, return to the field, and provide friendly workplace. Okay, and provide, in order to be friendly, we also have to provide childcare. And with that, we are hoping that the gender equality thing could be settled down to a real world, a real life. And hopefully in 10 years, we could report to you a better data. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chen, for this very interesting presentation and all the data that you have shared with us. And I believe that some of our participants will be very interested in getting to know more about Taiwan's involvement. Actually, what you have introduced is not only what has been achieved under the Tsai administration, and we can measure how much has been done, but also all the challenges ahead, and this graph that you shared with us about the lack of representation in the scientific community tells us a lot about the challenge ahead. And I hope it won't take 200 years to reach that level, hopefully.
Hopefully not.
I believe we will have many questions as regard also the representation of Taiwan at the level of international institutions, and I assume that you will be coming back to that topic during the Q&A session. Now I will be leaving the floor to Marie-Cécile Naves. Thank you very much, Marie-Cécile, for being with us. I believe that you will not summarize on what has been said, but perhaps explain to us some perspectives about the global situation and and also these two examples that have been introduced by our two panelists. I leave you the floor for about 15 minutes or so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barthélémy. I hope you can hear me because I'm in a very noisy place. Is it okay for you?
Okay.
It looks good. Sounds good.
Kind of click machine additional to the music, so I'm really sorry about that. Well, thank you very much, and good morning or afternoon, everyone. I should start with saying that. Thank you very much for this initiative and today's conference, and I would say special thanks to the IRIS event and communication team. So let me start by saying that as we can see today, the history of feminism or feminisms is accelerating, and their geography is expanding, and their media coverage is increasing. They are characterized by national or regional specificities, as we could see today, for sure. But one can no longer talk about a center and peripheries for these movements at the global level. Influences circulate from one continent or from one country to another, and everyone can therefore see that feminisms are a sum of knowledges and know-how. Scientific, academic, practical, activist, but also citizen knowledge are at the heart of feminisms today, and yesterday, of course. The feminist agenda is also becoming broader. Women's movements are transnational and their claims are cross-cutting. And the fields of expression are moreover increasingly numerous, be it in art, in entertainment, in sports, in the employment fields, in the academic field also, as we could see previously, and so on. Every human socialization field is concerned, and of course, all generations are concerned too. And at a time of health, environmental, political, socio-economic crisis, feminisms should be seen as ways to remove blind spots in our understanding of the world beyond the single issue of women's rights. And when I say our understanding of the world, I mean researchers, of course, but also citizens and political authorities' understanding. So maybe the question we should ask is, what do feminism or feminisms, but also anti-feminism, tell us about the state of the world? That when it comes to diminish women's rights, it's often the first step to threaten all human rights. Feminist peace research, notably, has shown that there can literally be no peace without justice, and that there can be no real solution to global problems without a crucial interdisciplinary feminist analysis, because wars, conflicts, and all kinds of occasional or structural crises are intrinsically gendered and affect individuals very differently. Feminisms also tell us that there is some emergency to change the geopolitical scope in economy, in employment, in education, in health, in conflicts and post-conflict situations, in climate, of course, energy, culture, urban policies, transportation, medicine, new technologies, and so on. Actually, all spheres of human life and interactions are concerned. And I would say, maybe it's a bit provocative, but I would say it anyway, a feminist approach is demanding. And I think this is good news because, you know, feminism says no to many things, but it also says yes. It's a source of proposals. For example, the expression femme, vie, liberté, women, life, freedom in Iran today promotes equality, solidarity, freedom for all, be they women or men. It's not only criticizing a situation that is terrible, but it's also proposing something else for a better society, which benefits to everybody. Feminism, and I would say more generally a gender-based, a gender-conscious approach of public policies, aim at transforming society as a whole. This is why it is revolutionary, sorry. They induce us to listen to different stories, to others' stories, but also to develop everybody's capabilities in learning from each other. Feminisms, among other sources of inspiration, help public authorities at the local, national, or international levels to build collaborative policies based on confidence and a large scale of talents. So, what is at stake with a gender-conscious approach of reality? It's both a matter of politics and a matter of methods in order to be more efficient. It's an ethical question, but also an efficiency question. This is why I would like to insist on the fact that a gender-conscious approach of political, social, and economic issues is not gendered. On the contrary, it aims at being degendered in the end. Feminism is an alternative way to govern and to lead, whether the power is in the hands of men or women. It aims at fighting endogamies, at creating common goods for policies, and at promoting a large variety of skills. And maybe the main challenges we are confronted with are as following. The first one I would say is fluidity. We must facilitate links between activism and from academic research with public policies, how to facilitate those links. Yet, what political parties propose in most democracy is not groundbreaking most of the time. It is all the more disappointing as democracy is a constantly evolving process. And the history of feminism relates to dialogue, debate, intellectual confrontation. It also relates to the ability to listen to citizens' voices, whoever they are. So why not rely on such know-how? The second challenge, I would say, is coherence. If we do not take seriously women's experiences, skills, fieldwork, we are going to miss a lot. If we consider women only as victims and not as actors, we are going to miss a lot. If we do not invite them to peace-building negotiations, we are going to miss a lot. If we think that a gender-balanced top management trickles down, we are making mistakes. And if we don't assess the impact of public policies devoted to women's or minorities' rights, then we fail. And I would add a third challenge, which is as following. It is to not underestimate opponents. We surely can talk about feminism as a global strength, but conversely, anti-feminists are strong all over the world, including in democracies, and toxic masculinity is a strong motive. I don't want to finish with this very negative or negative aspect of the topic, but I would like to mention it anyway. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marie-Cécile. Actually, I think you asked the first question, which is the challenges for democracies. I mean, we have here two examples of democracies involved in gender equality, and we have seen the progress that has been done. But yet, there are some questions as regards the challenges within democratic society. And perhaps I will start by addressing this question to Dr. Chen in the context of Taiwan. Obviously, the situation proves that Taiwan is quite isolated at the Asian level, which shows that Taiwan is perhaps a model and a progressive one, which is, of course, very good. But at the same time, we see that many countries in the regional context, including democracies, I'm thinking about Japan and Korea, for instance, are not, let's say, reaching similar numbers, unfortunately, and stand behind. I assume that Japan and Korea are among the OECD members at the bottom of the list when it comes to gender equality. So how do you explain first this gap, this difference between Taiwan and some other democracies in Asia? And second, how do you see a possible convergence of Taiwanese political parties when it comes to gender equality. You have an election in the next 2 months in Taiwan, presidential election. There will be a new president. And of course, we question the legacy of Tsai Ing-wen and whether all the progress that you have developed will be sustained. So I would like to hear you about this topic in particular to start the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. The first question, what is the difference between Taiwan and other major Asia countries, right? For that part, I think democracy definitely really make a significant part in Taiwan. And also we have really good role model, our President Tsai, and we have really many very, very strong female legislators. They really set up a good example that we can be like that. You know, we always tell our youngster that you can be like that. So they have example. I think that's one very important thing. The other thing, I strongly believe that, that's also my observation. I strongly believe that the females, the difference, the gap between females, the women's and men, sometimes it comes from education, very young age. So, like, I think this also go to the second question that actually is related. What we are trying to do now, I just show you pictures of high school. Actually, NSTC, my institute also, and our Minister of Education, we've been doing many education parts to actually tell girls and boys they are the same. They could go to the thing they really like to do. We put students in train and show them how science experiment can work. We do a lot of activity when they're young. That's one thing that I think really actually make difference in Taiwan. So another thing is, even though, because this start very, very early on, even though we have two parties or many parties, all right? So our election is coming and we can predict the result now. However, because this really building in our culture, I think even though we change party, we have differences. President Tsai is always would be our very important role model for the whole country. So that is very important. If we educate our kids early on, that make difference. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Delphine, I can see that you raised your hand, so perhaps you want to react to that.
Yeah, I wanted to react on the specific case of South Korea, because this is something that I actually bring up in my book, which you mentioned, which just came out in French and hopefully in English at some point. So obviously the issue of the parameter of education, culture, and history plays a role. But as you said, when you compare Japan and South Korea on one hand and Taiwan on the other hand, why is there a major difference? I think one of them is Taiwan has, I don't know if you have a quota law or no, or parity law, but you have 40% of women in parliament. And I was just checking the share of women in Korean parliament, it's 19% and has been stagnating for a number of years. I don't know how many years. I was just reading that out of these very few women, only 3 women were elected outside of Seoul, out of the capital, which means there are great regional disparities. So, you know, representation matters. Of course, it's not the only thing that changes something in terms of gender equality, but it is true. If you have more women in power, if you have a woman president, if you have a woman prime minister, if you have more women in cabinet, and if you have more female lawmakers, it does change a little bit of things. Although one should say that South Korea had a women president and didn't change anything for good in that sense. But the other thing I wanted to mention is I do mention South Korea as a counterexample of a democracy, an advanced country that has recently elected just last year a conservative president who actually ran officially very overtly on a misogynistic platform, who pledged to suppress the Ministry for Women's Rights and Gender Equality, which he hasn't managed yet to do so, but who could do so, who had actually actively recruited the votes of what we call the incel community. So the incel communities are these online communities of mostly actually young men who are frustrated by the advancements in gender equality, by the enormous progress that South Korean women have made in society and in politics, despite major, major challenges, and who think that now, women dominate society and it should be reversed. And so he has actually recruited these votes and really surfed on anti-women hatred and sentiment amongst the young generation. It's very interesting to see also that in the polls that the vast majority of men, especially young men, voted for the conservative candidate who was elected, versus the vast majority of women actually voted for the Democratic candidates. It's not always the case that it's very clear that there's a differentiation in voting between men and women, but in South Korea it was very clear. And so we're looking at this example, and again, this is something that would happen in Europe, in North America. It would certainly happen in the US already, but it could happen. And it could also happen with a women candidate. In Italy, we have a woman prime minister who ran on a ultra-reactionary platform, pledging to dismantle LGBTQI rights, which is doing right now, pledging to kind of send back women to home, pledging to go back to conservative values, to the motherland and to God and so on, very conservative Catholic values. And she's a woman also. So again, it's very nuanced, but we should be very careful what happens even in democratic countries.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for your remarks as regards Korea in particular. As you have mentioned, the presidency of Park Geun-hye didn't improve the situation in gender equality, which is a major difference with Taiwan. And also, perhaps just to go beyond what you have said, the fact that in Korea we have observed a very important movement as a consequence of the Me Too movement and rejection by young men in particular of this movement. So the issue seems to be very different from what it is nowadays in Taiwan. And I assume that for the participants to this webinar, it is very interesting to understand the specificities of Taiwan at the regional level, and the fact that it's not just democracies versus authoritarian regimes. It's more cultural. It's something that has been addressed at different levels depending on the countries, including democratic ones. So thank you for the comments. And also when it comes to European countries, I think we understand the fact that democracies are potentially threatened by measures that would stop the process and the progress when it comes to gender equality. And the examples of Poland, Hungary, and Italy that you have mentioned should be letting us know about the risk for some other countries, including France. Perhaps a question here to Marie-Cécile as actually a follow-up on this comment. In the United States, there will be an election taking place very soon also. And do you see a potential threat to the progress and achievements made under the Biden administration, in the case, of course, of a comeback of Donald Trump? So what is the current situation in the United States? And I understand that you know that topic very well.
Well, the comeback of Trump is a very plausible hypothesis. So we have to keep it in mind for next year. It's very interesting because in the US, there had just been 2 days ago very important ballots in Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky, and Mississippi. And 3 of them were specifically on the right to abortion. As you know, the Supreme Court in June 2022 gave all the 50 states the possibility to ban or to authorize abortion. And some politicians want to go even further and to ban abortion at the federal level, I mean at the national level. And whenever this topic has been put in ballot since June 2022, voters, even in conservative states, say, no, we want to keep this right as open as possible. And what happened in Virginia and Kentucky and Ohio 2 days ago is that this right has been defended once again, even in conservative states such as Ohio, where this right is going to be put in the constitution of the state. So why do I say that? I say that because it's probably one of the main issues of the presidential campaign of, well, let's say next year, but it has already begun. Probably that the Republican Party is a bit tricked with this issue, and it can be a motive, and it's already a motive for the turnout of young people, of women, including women from the right. So we have to keep an eye on that, and of course, if Donald Trump comes back to the White House, but also if the Congress has a Republican majority. Today, it's a short majority in the House of Representatives, and it's a Democrat majority at the Senate. But if things were going to change, I mean, a broader majority at the House and a Republican majority at the Senate, probably that there would be a national ban on abortion after, I don't know, 6, 12, 15 weeks. They are thinking about that. So yeah, a threat on women's rights is not likely, but it's something we can expect to happen, and not only in the field of reproductive and health rights, but also in the field of employment, in the field of economy, in the field of education, because the American right is very reluctant to oblige companies to fight against gender discrimination in salaries, in careers, in management, and so on. So yes, the US is a very good example to show that even in democracies and in all democracies, women's rights are always at stake and can always be threatened and backlashed. So yes, and more. That's what I was briefly saying when I was speaking a few minutes ago, that anti-feminisms all over the world are a strong strength, and we have to keep that in mind, and we have to be very cautious when we think that women's rights are something that is definitive. It's absolutely not the case, and we have a lot to learn from other countries, us Western people.
And I believe we have to learn also from Taiwan in particular. Well, the election in the United States, just as a quick reminder, will be taking place in exactly a year from now. And I guess that the entire world will be following not only the debates and the results, but also the consequences of this election. And you have pointed out the potential risk when it comes to the involvement of the United States in gender equality. The relations between the US and Taiwan is particularly important, as we all know. And in that prospect, I have a question here for Dr. Chen about let's say the model, the Western model, but carried mostly in the United States and Anglophone countries, when it comes to different education programs, master's degrees, different training programs that exist as regards the feminist studies. Do you have something similar in Taiwan? Is it something that has developed through the year? And therefore, did you take the example of Western societies when it comes to teaching the younger generations about the importance of such issues?
Actually, a very interesting observation is that maybe 80% of our faculty in Taiwan that teach college students, master students, usually would have their degrees abroad, because we would like to have our faculty have foreign experiences, and mostly in United States. Some, very few in Europe, and now more and more in Europe. So with that said, it actually explains our system. It's very similar. It's getting more similar to what happens in United States. Now, so I think that part of if we look at the graph that I introduced to you, that in the beginning, at the age of maybe 20 to 25, our youngster actually, male and female, they behave quite similarly because they are the younger generations. But then our older generations, though they being more impacted by the previous generation, stereotype things like men has to do certain things and female has to do certain things. They have different burden. It takes time to solve. But I think with, I totally agree with Delphine that we really need to have women's in power to change the system, to advocate the importance. So things being gradually changed. And I think with time, and also another very important thing is that women in any field, including in science, has to actually get together, be our friends, each other, and support each other. So then for all the female could move better in the career path. That's what we have been doing. And I think that would explain part of our cultures. Actually, the younger generation, at least, are actually pretty close to the United States and Europe, I think. Right.
Mm-hmm. And also close to Japan, which is ironic when it comes to the gender equality issue, but to notice the big gap and yet the very strong interest that the young Taiwanese show for the Japanese society. I have a question for Delphine O. When it comes to the international institutions, and you have a particular mandate at the UN, we observe, of course, the lack of representation of Taiwan. And I assume that when it comes to gender equality, engaging a dialogue within international institutions is one of the keys to promote some changes and to push several societies to follow a model implemented by the UN. So how do you communicate with the Taiwanese authorities? How do you manage to establish a link that officially does not exist between the UN and Taiwan in this prospect?
Well, I couldn't say about the UN, but about France, I think it's what applies in general to all of the bilateral relationship between France and Taiwan. Actually, in the context of the Generation Equality Forum, which again was organized by the UN but co-chaired by France and Mexico, we were approached by I think some parliamentaries from Taiwan. But this was organized by the UN. In the context of the UN, there could only be member state representation, official member state representation. However, what we did at the Generation Equality Forum, we had different issues, but resulted in the same result, is that many of the member states didn't want to participate, which was not the case of the government of Taiwan, but they didn't want to participate because they were openly against women's rights and gender equality. However, we wanted representation from these countries, not necessarily from the government of the state. And so we worked with civil society organizations. So the representation of civil society, which was much larger and broader than actually the 70-something member states that were officially taking part in the Generation Equality Forum. And in general, this is what we do because, as you might imagine, the issue of gender equality in the context of bilateral relations is often very tricky and very difficult to discuss. But this has changed. So we, especially since we adopted a feminist foreign policy, we make a point that we need to table this as an issue, as a subject for discussion, even with the most regressive states when it comes to gender equality. We also recall and sort of base our discussion on international human rights and international rights in general, on the international legislative framework. I was mentioning the Beijing Convention. I could mention the CEDAW, which was adopted in 1979, the Convention for the Elimination of violence against women, violence and discrimination against women. This is, interestingly and ironically, the most largely ratified convention in the whole UN human rights framework, or legal apparatus, more than all of the international pact on economic and civil rights and so on. It has been adopted, I think, by 179 countries. And so what we do is we recall member states to their international obligations. And in other situations such as Taiwan, or countries that have governments that are not progressive and do not want to come on board, then we can work with civil society, bring them on board, civil society organization. And this is also a major change from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, where we used to work only from government to government, which is very important, but we also realized that we cannot make much progress. We have to work at the UN, but there's so much backlash and resistance that we need to be working directly from government to civil society in other countries to be supporting them and bringing their voice to international fora.
Yeah, I think you made the point when it comes to how Taiwan can play a role there. I mean, it's Taiwanese society and not the Taiwanese political system as such, and it's very interesting. Perhaps a question for Dr. Chen, actually, when it comes to the image that Taiwan is offering us. I mean, this is a question that many observers of Taiwan and East Asia in general, and me in particular, we have in mind. Like it seems to us that Taiwan is perhaps trying to show a good image of its society by using different means, including its involvement in gender equality. So would you say that this is a part of what we may refer to as some sort of soft power strategy conducted by the Taiwan authorities and notably under the Tsai administration?
Yes, you are absolutely right. I need to say that it's really a pity that we are not able to join many official, really valuable organizations. Truly, that's a loss for everybody. But with that said, what we can do is to actually communicate, collaborate with our like-minded friends. I was just in France last month, in September, actually 2 months ago. So we have lots of collaborators at different levels, and we have different types of awards, different types of travel funding to support people actually visit each other. And this type of action actually go to different disciplines. So with that, I think what the Taiwan society is very open, and we are very, very good at science and technology. We have really very friendly and welcome culture, and we love to collaborate. Those are the things that we develop during our collaborations and our travel opportunity. So this we really appreciate. Yeah.
Perhaps we have about 10 minutes before ending this webinar. Perhaps a question to Marie-Cécile. When it comes to the example of Taiwan, I know that you have been engaged in the feminist studies in the past couple of decades, and you have published many works on that. How do you see and evaluate the achievements in Taiwan? Is it something that you find inspiring, considering the fact that it shows that non-Western societies can show lots of progresses in gender equality? Or is it something that still needs to be let's say, explored and taught perhaps to the scientific community, but also the younger generations here in Europe or in the United States?
Well, the youngest generations don't wait for us to tell them what to read and what to look at. And your question is very good because actually, as I said at the beginning, there is no center and peripheries of feminisms. There are circulations of influences, of agendas, of action modes all over the world. For example, we talk about in the Western world about Me Too, which is a Western movement at the beginning and, well, mainly afterwards also. But before the Me Too movement began in the US, there were strong movements in Argentina, in Spain, in India in 2012 against collective rapes in public transportations. We could also refer to the Arab Springs, well, the way it has been called 1 year before. So we absolutely have to decenter the way we look at the world and the way we look at those movements. And of course, relativism is a bad solution. But anyway, we have to look at what happens everywhere in the world and what is actually happening happening in Iran, in Chile, in many African countries also is good food for thought. And what had struck me about Taiwan, although I don't know much about Taiwan, but a little bit, is that feminism and gender equality has been used as a lever for modernity. Not only in the communication of your government, but also practically. It's linked to the use of new technologies in the transformation of democracy. It's used in the way you can distinguish yourself from autocracies in the region, etc., etc. So it's not only branding, it's not only communication, it's real. It's really happening. So the question about soft power is very interesting. And yes, we have to open our mind and the way we consider other countries. And it's very interesting to compare. It's very interesting to travel. It's very interesting to see and to inspire from other regions and other feminisms. That's why I like to talk about feminisms with an S.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think it's also important to exchange and to engage a dialogue. It's important to travel and to get to know the others, but also to exchange. And when it comes to Taiwan, I mean, we have mentioned the lack of representation within the international institutions, but we may also mention the fact that, unfortunately, not so many countries have a recognition of the Republic of China, aka Taiwan. And my question, and that will be actually the final question because it's just a few minutes remaining, and I believe perhaps that all of you may have some interest in answering it. So let's start with Dr. Chen, perhaps. When it comes to this lack of diplomatic ties, it is obviously a problem when it comes to addressing certain issues and certain challenges. But it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that when it comes to gender equality, this is actually a topic, and Delphine told us already a lot about that when it comes to international institutions, that goes beyond the representation of states and addresses societies. So how does Taiwan engage a dialogue with the so-called global South, and especially Southeast Asian societies, which are, I believe, very interested in the development model, the economic model of Taiwan, but also the progresses among the Taiwanese society. And so I will leave you the floor first, and then maybe Delphine and Marie-Cécile, if you want to comment on how to go beyond this lack of representation, and how can we really communicate on global issues without being restrained by the political models. So Dr. Chen.
Yes, this is really an excellent question. I think it goes to one very important point, that we consider Taiwan is a hub that we collect and we integrate, we collaborate cultures and different parts, not just from United States, from Europe, but also from South Asia. We have, again, I also consider education is important because we have many immigrants and students from South Asia, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand. So they actually integrate into our society now. We have, so with that, what we can do is to actually spreading our values and integrate also the precious cultural value from other country. So what we are doing is we have our school education, we spread our system, and we hopefully our gender value could also impact on our like-minded country. And we have very, very strong faith on that, right?
Delphine or Marie-Cécile, either of you, if you want to make some conclusive remarks, actually.
Well, I'm definitely no expert of the situation in Taiwan and how it handles its relationships, with UN member states and with the rest of the world. What I can say is, even, in France, I would say maybe half of our work is within the UN and half of our work is outside of the UN. Mm-hmm. This has changed over the years. It used to be, again, purely intergovernmental within the UN framework or the multilateral institutions. But even, my work is being done on one hand with the Department of the United Nations within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and on the other hand with the Directorate for Global Affairs. And this covers, what we'll do in terms of health, education, youth, overseas development aid, and this does not go through the UN. Well, some of it could go through some of the UN agencies like UNICEF, UNFPA, UN Women, but a lot of the work is actually directly collaborating, again, with civil society organizations, with regional organizations, with private sector from the Global South and from other countries. So I see no impediment for Taiwan to be engaging directly with Global South, civil society organizations, or even local governments, or even Global North civil society organizations. And I, spend half of my time traveling, attending conferences. Some of it is at the UN in New York, Geneva, or other places, but some of it is also just big international conferences organized by NGOs working on women's rights. I was in Kigali, Rwanda this summer in July at a conference called Women Deliver that takes place every 4 years, and there was 90% of representation was civil society, actually maybe 10% was government, and it's dedicated to being this platform. So this has become a huge change in our work as diplomat, is that we interact with civil society much more than we used to before.
Thank you. Marie-Cécile, if you have a final word.
Very briefly, because we are lacking time, I would say that all we have to do, well, not all we have to do, but mainly we could and should identify the levels of change and share them in order to scale up at the local level, but also at the international level. Share what we can do together and what we can learn from each other, but in a very concrete way, and not only in the feminist circles, but also in broader ones, with the economic, political, activist, and citizen spheres, because we have a lot to learn from each other. It's very abstract, but it could be very concrete.
Well, indeed, it is the end of our webinar. I would like to thank the three of you very much. It was extremely interesting. And to be honest with you, this is a topic that I'm not as familiar with as you are. And I was particularly interested in your presentations and these exchanges. Just a quick reminder, this webinar will be shared online within the next 2 weeks. So there will be a possibility to watch it again, and it will be on the IRIS YouTube page specifically. So thank you very much, Delphine, for joining us and sharing your experience and your expertise on this topic. Thank you very much, Chen Yi-Juang, for explaining to us the situation in Taiwan, and especially within the scientific community. And thank you very much, Marie-Cécile Naves, for giving us some insights about the challenges ahead, and also the difficulty sometimes to implement a comprehensive dialogue when it comes to not only feminist combat or feminist issues, but also the gender equality, which is, of course, one of the most important goals. Thank you all very much for listening to this webinar today. I believe that Marie-Cécile and I will be organizing many more events on these issues in the future, so we will keeping you informed. Again, good evening, Dr. Chen, and have a good day, Delphine and Marie-Cécile, and I hope to see you in the near future. Bye-bye.
See you soon, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.